I still remember the sticky heat of that room, the unwelcome hum of the ceiling fan, the tightly coiled anxiety in my stomach as I sat across from the university committee. I dressed too formally, a navy suit hand-pressed, hoping it would lend gravity to an idea everyone said was frivolous. My hands trembled as I smoothed the edges of my portfolio. 20 pages, the culmination of 2 years, my proposal to weave data into art, to translate the invisible language of Nairobi's living city into color and form. Professor Wanjiru peered over her glasses at me. She was the one I feared most, sharp, direct, impatient with things she considered extracurricular. Around her, the other lecturers sat in an arc, their faces an audience of unreadable expressions. The city's noise filtered through the open jalousie windows, a matatu blaring gospel, street vendors haggling, the world moving on regardless. Mr. Mutaizo, Wanjiru began, sliding her pen back and forth, let's begin. I nodded and launched into my spiel. I spoke of how live bus routes flickered and pulsed, tracing the beating patterns of movement through the city, how rainfall affected markets, how social media trends flared and faded, sometimes with breathtaking symmetry. My idea, my dream, was to map these rhythms into visual pieces, sculptures and projections illuminating our overlooked patterns. I spoke as if clarity could hold back the tremors of my voice, as if the strength of my belief could fill the room. But as the minutes ticked on, I felt it draining away, replaced with the cold certainty that none of them saw what I did. When I finished, there was silence. Professor Wanjiru didn't bother to hide her skepticism. And you would call this art, she said the word like a questionable diagnosis. You want us to believe that Nairobi's traffic, its noise, its complaints and hopes, they are worthy of the gallery. I felt grief like a fist behind my ribs, threatening to burst through. Yes, I replied, because to elaborate would only be to dilute. I hadn't learned yet how to speak their language. Another professor jumped in, older, bearded, quick with his skepticism. Where is the discipline? I see statistics, only statistics painted in bright colors. The connection to culture, to real art, is tenuous. I believe it's a new form, I started. He cut me off. You believe, yes. That's not enough. There was a brief consultation amongst the panel. I watched the gold clock on the wall, heard the minutes click onward, sour and slow. The decision itself was swift. Rejection, voiced in academic terms but delivered with a finality that felt personal. You are welcome to resubmit with a more established approach, Professor Wanjiru added, with a final look that landed between disappointment and something sharper. Later in the corridor, the world swarmed, other students with dreams, muttered jokes, laughter clattering against the tiled floors. I kept walking, portfolio tucked under my arm, the pages suddenly heavy. The university, with its ancient jacarandas and sun-faded posters, felt like something I needed to walk out of and keep walking, maybe forever. That day, even the color of the sky seemed to mock me, too bright, too unyielding. When I came home that evening, my uncle Maina was waiting in the courtyard, chiding a neighbor's boy who had let a goat nibble at his maize seedlings. He saw me, and I didn't need to say a word. My face must have told it all, still his voice thudded with the certainty of disappointment. Kumbu matoka shul matema, so you're back from school early. They rejected my proposal, uncle, I said, throat tight. He sucked his teeth, dismissing it with a wave. Ari artemimi naligua, I even knew it. What is this nonsense about drawing numbers? Our people paint with ochre or chisel stone, not data and screens. Even your father, rest his soul, would have laughed. He shook his head, turning his attention back to the stubborn goat, but his words stuck. Inside, my mother waited with sweet tea and a gentler disappointment. You should not let these small failures eat you, Mwana Wangu, she said. If you paint for the city, paint things they will hang in banks or hotels, find good work. You are clever, but dreams are slippery. It didn't take long for the word to spread. Before the week's end, I was known as the boy who paints with numbers, an epithet slathered with sarcasm whenever my cousins passed, their laughter a staccato reminder of my foolishness. The ridicule wasn't sharp but steady, relentless, like the way rain seeps into stone. In Mathare, dreams are only as valuable as their utility. Engineer, doctor, lawyer, these are the stories parents tell to ease their hunger at night, promises that a child's ambition might one day transform into the safety of a roof that doesn't leak. Mine was just a punchline, but I couldn't stop seeing the world in patterns. I noticed how the shadows of Mbambakofi trees shifted in step with the chaos of Gikomba Market, how Boda Boda drivers zigzagged along alleys in choreographies more beautiful than any ballet. When it rained too hard, tuk-tuk drivers hunkered beneath awnings, their silence a negative space, an absence that was its own shape, its own language. When the power flickered, I traced the neighborhoods left dark and the geometry of their hopes. Grief was slowly replaced by clarity, rejection strung, but it also stripped away the need to explain myself to people who would never listen. I sold the suit to pay for paint and bought old computers from the electronics market, battered screens, missing keys, enough that I could teach myself to code. I scavenged for discarded wood and plastics, anything I might someday project onto. In the evenings, I found a corner at the Starways Internet Cafe, which buzzed with faded blue light and the humming of cheap fans. I watched videos about data visualization, pulse art, interactive installations in cities I'd never heard of. I borrowed books, then returned them with notes scribbled in the margins, my own desperate dialogue. During the day, I worked at the Mathare stand, waving flyers and collecting fares, my mind always returning to the kinetic lines of their routes, Mwanzi to Marigiti, up a hill to Pipeline. I started keeping notebooks, filling them with the data of everyday life, snippets of overheard conversation, times and tides of people. Every now and then, I'd pass other members of my old committee or friends from the university. They'd ask with forced politeness if I had found proper work yet. I shook my head and smiled, though inside the ache still lingered. I kept at it quietly and alone. The hunger was always there, sometimes for food, sometimes for encouragement, but clarity worked through me like the slow but sure healing of a wound. It took me 4 years to finish my first real project. It happened in pieces. One screen showing live traffic, lights strung in patterns according to rainfall data, built from power lines nobody wanted. A sculpture where market prices morphed the shape of a cloud-like mesh. When you walked around it, the colors shifted. If you touched its metallic veins, music played, a soundscape built from the electronic screeches and synthesized chatter of M-Pesa messages and news alerts. The first time I activated it alone in a storage room, I cried quietly, not from pride, but from relief. I took a video and uploaded it to my hardly followed social feeds. Then I waited. I wasn't expecting anything. But Nairobi has its own secret ways of listening. A few days later, a young journalist named Amina slid into my messages. She'd seen the video, wanted to learn more. She came to the storage room, filmed me as I demonstrated the sculpture. Her questions were patient, even playful. She asked if the music sounded the way my soul felt. When the story aired, it ran alongside segments on housing protests and the rising cost of bread. I almost missed it, but my neighbor pulled me to her flat, the screen tiny but the moment enormous. My phone buzzed for hours that night. The flood that followed was unexpected. Gallery invitations, offers from tech companies, even a message from a startup in London wanting to commission a piece. I learned to say, yes, let's chat, even when my voice faltered, learned to invoice, to negotiate, to turn clarity into currency. But every success story carries a weight of memories behind it, ghosts that tug at sleeves. 5 years later, my name was known, at least in certain circles. Nairobi Tech Week invited me to give an address. A new gallery owned by a pair of ambitious sisters wanted to mount a full exhibition. The British Council wrote to ask if I'd mentor students in Kibra. Still, I hesitated the day I received a thin, official-looking envelope stamped University of Nairobi. They were organizing a regional conference on urban futures. They invited me as a guest speaker and to display my work. I almost refused. It wasn't pride, but a blend of old grief and new clarity. Did I really want to return to press old wounds? I pictured my uncle, my mother, and all those faces from the committee. After a night's thought, I agreed. The day I returned to campus, the jacarandas were in wild bloom, painting the avenues with violet and gold. I wore a simple black shirt, nothing formal. My equipment arrived in battered crates. Volunteers helped me rebuild the installation in the university hall, with its grand old windows opening to the noise of traffic and the scent of earth after rain. It had grown since the first version, 3 large screens now, a kinetic sculpture of interlocked wires and glowing orbs, projections that swept across the walls in living color, moving, shifting with the heartbeat of Nairobi. Live data poured in: traffic, air quality, the pulsing currents of money and hope. I stood at one side, breathing it in as the city moved within my work. On the day of the unveiling, the hall filled slowly, students, faculty, curious city dwellers. Tech company teams, journalists with their tiny tripods. I thought I felt the old ache return, but it quickly drowned in adrenaline. Near the front, I spotted Professor Wanjiru. Her hair, still jet black, showed a few silver threads now. Beside her, several of the old committee, grayer but no less dignified. They didn't notice me at first. When the moment came, I stood at the microphone. I didn't give a grand speech. Instead, I told the audience about the loneliness of seeing the world differently, about the way beauty hides in patterns, about grief turning into clarity. Then I stepped aside, lights dimmed. My installation came alive, the room filled with pulsating light weaving the data of the city, its breath, its pain, its joy into color and sound. A traffic jam in Westlands crawled across a wall in burning orange. The fluctuating stock prices made the kinetic sculpture twist and grow. Rainfall patterns shimmered 1,000 blue points. When someone stood close, their phone's Bluetooth data flickered overhead, naming each connection. Mary's Galaxy, Tech Guru 21's Nairobi Dreamer. The soundscape began, the rising and falling tones woven from market sellers' calls, the blare of matatus, snatches of street prayer, the metallic click of M-Pesa payments, arranged into a layered symphony. It was the city singing back to itself. A hush fell over the crowd, the unique silence of awe. For a long moment nobody said anything, not even the cynics. I saw faces I knew, my cousins, mouths hanging open. My mother stood in the aisle, tears bright on her cheeks betraying her pride. Near her, Uncle Maynard stood, hats in hand he rarely removed, confusion battling with something like wonder. Professor Wanjiru sat perfectly still. At the end, as the lights returned, she approached the sculpture. She ran her fingers along the wires, watching colors follow her touch. "Mr. Mutize," she said, finally meeting my eyes. Her voice was quiet, flat, but careful. "I did not think, I could not have imagined." She trailed off, then looked up at the kinetic weaving of her own heart rate glimmering above her. My system had mapped it, tracking her pulse as she stood. The display showed her name, then spiraled outward in violet. She laughed, once astonished, a note of humility. Perhaps, in time, every city will need such a mirror. I couldn't summon words, the emotion nearly unmoored me. Afterward the gallery crowd thinned as the evening sun stretched long golden limbs across the grass. My family gathered around me. My mother gripped my hand, her small palm trembling. "Li, Nimona," she whispered. "Now I see." Even Uncle Maynard, never one for grand declarations, slapped my back. "Wachaninde Nyanji Kwa Chama," he joked. "They'll never believe it, I saw our matatus inside your work." He gave a little laugh, awkward, shy. Old neighbors and former classmates came forward, each searching for words. "You painted the city, you really did. How did you do that? Is that really my route?" Underneath the chatter, I felt a steady sense of peace. The redemption wasn't in their praise, but in the simple fact that I had not abandoned the shape of my own vision. Night fell, the university grounds became quiet, save for crickets and distant matatu horns. The sculpture's light still glimmered, reflecting in windows, twining street life and hope. I packed up my equipment with steady hands. I walked home under Nairobi's stars, passing familiar streets, buzzing with life, filled with stories I now understood were worth translating. In the end, what I'd wanted wasn't recognition, nor apology, and certainly not vengeance. I wanted belonging and understanding, and a chance to show that what's mocked today may be, in time, what allows a city to see itself. As I stepped over the cracked sidewalk and into the arms of my waiting family, I held onto that clarity, soft and luminous, knowing I'd come home by way of the long path, but finally, unmistakably home.